Welcome to the second hour of Mindshifters Radio. Today is Monday, May the 27th, 2024. Our call-in number is 563-999-3581 and press 1, and that puts you into queue to talk to us. We'd love to hear your comments and questions because that makes this your show. We hope everybody's having a blessed Memorial Day, especially to those who have served or the families thereof. And we welcome you to the show. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, dear heart, and welcome, everybody. Honored and delighted that you're here as we tap into this idea of remembering. And I'd like to give a different meaning or purpose to remembering at this point, because oftentimes remembrance, especially when it's something that's set up around the idea of war and suffering and death, becomes a remembering of war and suffering and death, which are simply energies that will tend to reinforce and continue the game. And my offering would be we shift that, and that instead of remembering the past, break down that word to remember. I'd invite you to consider that anyone that you would be doing a memorial around today or any other day of the year, that to is to do something again, and remember is to be a part of. And so I'd invite you to take loved ones who you might choose to remember, and instead of remembering out of loss or sadness or grief or remembering the sacrifice as such, that we bring the truth of who we are to connect with these members of our lives. So reconnecting as love to love in each of those cases so that we can be finished with remembering the past. Yes, it's important to know the past, because if we know the past, if we've investigated the past, we can see and understand the traps. We can do the healing that needs to be done out of those times. But ultimately, memory is nothing but a reflection of the past. And what science is even showing us is that when you remember something, you're not going back in and pulling up that memory. That's not what happens. Actually, when you resonate a certain set of brain cells with a thought about something from the past, in order to remember the past, the mind literally, the body literally has to take molecules and assemble them into neuropeptides and reassemble the memory. And you'll hear people say, oh, well, that's not the way I remember it. It's because your reassembly is different than it was last time. And it'll be different every time. When we bring the active presence of love to those memories of pain and trauma, when we reconnect to those with the active presence of love alive and vital in us, painful, the traumatic, the destructive aspects literally begin to dissolve. And it's that dissolution that is forgiveness. And so I just invite you to consider a project. And the project would be that of being willing to be shown every energetic pattern in your bloodline, of everyone ever in your bloodline that has ever led to the death of anyone. To be shown that. And to be shown that in the presence of you as the active presence of love, so that it can be dissolved. So the falsity, so the trauma can be literally transmuted by the active presence of love into truth. And of course, to do that, one of the things you have to do is breathe. And so I choose to breathe with you. I choose to connect with you and to be the presence of love. and deep appreciation for you being here today. And that was an awesome interview that Dr. Tim had. And we appreciate you, Guy Finley. I actually just went to the site he recommended. And unfortunately, that site is for sale. I assume he must have somehow lost it. So unfortunately, the book is not available at that site. I assume there's probably another one. I've texted him to let him know that. I assume he probably already does. But sometimes those accidents happen when something doesn't get renewed and somebody comes along and steals it, unfortunately. And then once that occurs, there's usually kind of, it's like a bandit that's holding you up. Obviously, Relationship Magic is his book. It's his site. Somebody else owns it now and wants almost $4,000 for it. The games of the internet, the games of the world. In any event, delighted that you're here with us. And Miss Jeannie, do we have anybody in the phone queue with a hand up or anything happening in the chat room? Or any questions from the app or email? Or
we do not have a hand up, but someone that you said was possibly going to call in with a question is on the switchboard. I could turn their mic on and see if they want to talk.
Great.
It's either Carrie or Mark. Welcome to the show.
Merrick?
Thanks, sir.
Hey, welcome. How do you be? How are things in Mexico?
Muy bien, muy caliente. Very hot.
Yeah. Well, we're actually a little bit on the chilly side here. It's been like a rainforest for the last month. It's rained just about every day, and storms and thunder and lightning. And our garden's loving it. Things are just growing like crazy.
There you go. I was going to say it's got to be good for something.
It is. It definitely. The earth has been appreciating it. Our native species flower garden is just like one huge puffball, just filled with every plant we've planted, and the veggies are growing and looking good. So what's on your mind for today?
Well, I was talking with a buddy of mine yesterday, and he's going to be on here today, but I don't think he is. But it had to do with grief and things that are still embedded in the body and having reactions to them. In his case, it's severe reaction. To the point of convulsion, vision impairment, great depression.
It's a little hard to hear you.
Insomnia, all these kinds of things. And I was just telling them, I know there's a lot in the body. The doctors, of course, don't know what's going on. It's energetic. It's always energetic first, and then physical later. And I worked with him as much as I could, but I wanted him to meet the master and spend some time with you. So that's the reason I came on, was to see if he was on here. But there you have it.
Okay. And his name is?
His name is Jeremy.
Jeremy, if you're out there, if you push 1, that'll put a hand up in the phone queue, and Jeannie will know you're there, and we can get you on with us, if that's appropriate.
I do not see a phone number that I don't recognize out there.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll just put it on hold till he shows up.
All right, I'm reaching out to him on my side, too, to see if he could jump on. I haven't received it.
Cool. All right. Awesome. Well, any other thoughts for you while we're waiting for him?
Well, it had to do with that. It had to do with us keeping, or I'll speak in the first person, my keeping my old stuff that's still in my body that I don't even know it's there. And how do I dig through it? I know one of the ways is the worksheets, but how to bring that stuff that's in the unconscious up to the conscious. How do I love it out so I can love it free?
Well, I hear you loud and clear, and I've spent the last 50 years in the study of that and putting it into a formula or a set of tools. If you actually went back to the first radio show 14 years ago when you started listening from day one, 5 days a week, an hour to 2 hours a day for the last 14 years, that would be the only question I would answer through all of those radio shows. And it's, the original work that I started this with was the first century Aramaic forgiveness process. And then it just started to blossom and started to grow. Well, we have to take this into the arena of relationship. Okay, so then it became healing through relationships. And so we developed a set of tools for the fact that in our interaction with others, we're going to get to see the things that otherwise we pretend that we can hide from ourselves. And then that became, well, then you have to enhance communication in relationships. So that became communication. Did you hear what I think I said? And now we're up, I'm not even sure, I haven't counted them lately, up to 18 or 20 different workshops, each with its own set of tools and each with its own approach to how do we break down this veil, this barrier between the subconscious and the unconscious mind and access what's hidden there. And that's like, to me, that's the question of the ages and what I've dedicated the last half century to. I've actually, go ahead.
Peeling back the layers of the onion then and knowing that we're doing all we can. And
Yes.
be happy.
And be happy. Smile and be happy.
And breathe.
And yeah, the breath is a major key. It's the indicator. Every time the breath is restricted in any way, shape, or form, that's the indicator that something is trying to surface from the unconscious. In the ancient teachings, when they said the veil of the temple must be rent in twain, Church Annie told us they were talking about a purple curtain in the church. But that wasn't about a purple curtain in the church. The temple is this body-mind unit, and the veil literally is the barrier between the subconscious and the unconscious mind. And that veil is primarily built with the breath and primarily broken down with the breath.
Wow.
One of the things that I've started doing just in the last few weeks, actually, we haven't opened Heartland or done a live in-person intensive since 2019. And so I recently, and it was kind of as a result of an accident, of an interaction with someone, I recently started to pull out some of the very earliest tools that I learned in my medical training 50 years ago, and some of the very latest tools that I've been studying and working with literally up to just weeks ago, and have started doing a 3-day one-on-one personal intensive. And in that 3-day one-on-one, we're looking at not only how to, through relationships and psychologically, spiritually open that veil or that barrier, but physiologically, because when the literal antenna structure of the body, which is the bony structure, the head, the spine, and the pelvis, become either physically or emotionally traumatized and locked up, then the energetic patterns become locked in and through that tissue and the soft tissue surrounding it. And so tying that all together, I've kind of pulled out stuff that was too intense to do in just a regular intensive with a group of people. And I've started to do that just one-on-one and watching a whole new level. For many decades I've taught still point breathing, and now I'm moving into what I'm calling quantum still point, which just takes it to a whole different level.
Wow. I love the sound of that.
It's powerful, and one of the most exciting things of it for me, aside from watching the shifts that people are getting, is that I've found that each time that I've been doing this work with someone, it's taking my process to another level. It's showing me things that I need to move through. So that's been pretty cool.
Yes, yes, that's the way it works. And Boy Scouts, we used to say the 3 steps of learning was observing, doing, and then teaching. And on the teaching part, every time I teach it, I grow more. That's just the way of it. And
Yes.
I thought you were going to say when you were working on the breathing so many years ago, and then now I thought you were going to say that it's pretty much the same thing. But what I hear you saying is that it's the same thing at a higher level. And what I hear with that also is that it's the great shift of wages that are in, upgrading. So yes,
My
breathing, for instance, as you're saying, but we're taking it to different levels that we didn't know it before.
Yeah. Well, my take would actually be it actually is going to a new place in that it would be the difference between working in the world of physics and, the rules of physics as we understand them, and then going to the level of quantum physics. Well, is it the same? Yes, but it's not the same at all. It goes to a whole different level.
Right.
And, it ties all the way back. One of the first pieces of awareness I have in terms of historical references to quantum physics happens in the book of Job. When Job starts to connect the trauma that he's experiencing in his world with the fact that he has fear in his mind. And he's, after all that trauma, he has this beautiful, wonderful life, and all of a sudden everything falls apart. And then he realizes, that which I feared most has come upon me. That which I dreaded has happened to me. That's quantum physics. He's recognizing that what he's lending energy to with his mind is impacting and shifting the literal world around him. And what happens is that when we're physically or emotionally traumatized, the energetic patterns tend to lock into tissue at such a deep level that it's more than, and this is the first time I've really talked about this, so I'm thinking through it as I'm speaking about it. It's more than just the barrier of the breath, but it's the cementing into solidified energy, which we call matter, those trauma patterns. And it takes a level of physiological intensity to open them. And that's not something we normally expose ourselves to.
Oh, you said something I didn't quite put the word on. I don't remember what it was now. It's a different place, a higher.
It's really hard to understand you, Mark.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult to catch your words. Are you on a microphone or? Are you still with us, Merrick?
It shows he's still on the switchboard and his mic is on.
You've gone silent, sir. Maybe you can call back in?
He just dropped, so let's see if he calls back in.
Well, let's give him in to call back. And while we're waiting for him to call back, just join in taking a few deep breaths together and remembering with each other. And being willing to look at perhaps some of the things that we've been willing to compromise in order to fulfill the demands or the goals that the world has held for us. What have we had to give up? And are we willing to reclaim those things And the things might be the intelligence of the active presence of love. You know, I loved Tim's conversation that happened in the last hour. And as the conversation went on with he and Guy, the idea that Guy brought forward of, and it matches everything we're doing, that the active presence of love, they weren't his words, but that whenever we have something within us that we bring forward to the active presence of love, then that energy, whatever it is transmuted. And I had never heard the definition that he gave of patience, that is suffering oneself, to be in the space I can open the deepest, most painful parts of my own mind and my own tissue structure, and I can literally be present with that. That's a new definition of patience for me, and certainly a powerful one. So when I'm willing to soften whatever is locked up or tightened within me, then with that loosening comes awareness of what I've been resisting or fighting against. And you'll remember in the Aramaic language, resistance is the definition of Satan. What is Satan in Aramaic? It is the resistor, one who misleads. So when I'm willing to breathe at the deepest, gentlest levels of myself, there I will find those things that I've been resisting looking at. And very often they will be generational patterns that, prior to really being willing to remember, to reconnect with them, were perhaps never entertained consciously in the mind. So I invite everyone to join in the space of willingness to access any part of ourselves, to, we've said over and over and over again, it sounds like a tongue-in-cheek line, but it really isn't. I'm very literally saying that in order to heal, we have to be out of our minds. You can't stay locked in a mind that has a certain way of thinking and free yourself from that way of thinking. I love how Einstein said it. The mind can't solve you can't solve the problem with the mind that created it. And so the willingness to go to a different mind becomes a powerful step in the process.
And Mark's back.
Oh, great. Okay, where were we? At toward the end of our conversation there, Merrick, it was a little bit difficult to hear your voice. I don't know if there's any way to adjust that.
I had moved the kitchen. I think that might have dropped something and then it dropped. I moved back to my desk. I remember it had to do with actually shifting along with the shift of the ages that we're doing, because you talked about going into a quantum dimension, and I feel that everything we're doing is taking us to this new level.
Yes.
Having to unlearn really everything. I thought being a parent was what I was taught to do that is not that. I thought that I'm eating is all changing, and I'm throwing the old stuff out the window when I'm eating is something. How I'm thinking, just how
difficult to keep up with your words.
It's all within me, and it all comes back to that. It's all about me. When you were just saying, I have to be out of my mind to be able to get to the rest of it.
And when you think of, my background's in electronics with a side study in physics, And when we tie into the physics idea that everything is energy and that there's nothing other than energy, then each energy system, there has to be a way to get energy into that system. You know, if I have a lamp, I have to plug the lamp into a cord. There has to be a way for the current to get into the lamp to make the lamp operate. And one of the ways that energy systems bring energy in is by aligning. And my take, and this is something that I've, over the years worked on understanding, is that the core antenna of the human structure is our bones. The bones are not how we stand up. Muscles allow us to stand up. Bones literally are the antenna, and we go back to the ancient Aramaic idea, which speaks of the fact that we live, move, and have our being in the Creator, in the energy field of the Creator. The way that an energy gets into, let's say, a radio, is that there's an antenna that, when it's aligned properly, will bring a signal into the radio. My offering, my take, is that the bony structure, the head, the spine, and the pelvis are literally the antenna with which we interact with the universe. And if the antenna is in proper alignment, then we literally bring in that energy in which we live, move, and have our being. It's been called love. It's been called God, whatever you call it, that when we're in alignment, we capture that energy and bring it into, literally, pour it into the world through us. You know, that word in Aramaic, prayer, being to set a trap for God, is literally to become oriented and aligned in a way that you capture the energy field through which you move, and because there's nothing in you unlike that, there's simply the expression of that signal that's coming in. If we hold trauma-based energies, which we're not designed for, then those trauma-based energies tend to deform the antenna. And so a key part of the process is bringing that antenna back into alignment and facilitating the release of the tensions and the traumas that are literally held at a tissue level. And when that goes, it's almost like, I've got a TV change, and I change from channel 2 to channel 4, and all of a sudden, something that seemed to have a certain set of pictures and a certain sound to it totally changes, and they're totally different picture, totally different sound. When we take the trauma out of this antenna system, when we face it and dissolve it, it's literally like changing channels. Literally, that's the quantum shift that occurs. It's literally attuning to a different frequency than the frequency that we've been aligned by through our generational misunderstandings and misalignments, and coming back into the original state of alignment we're designed for. Most people think when the baby's soft spot hardens that the head is fixed, but actually it's not. It's in a continuous state of motion, and that motion moves it through a range of shapes, and the shape of an antenna determines the frequencies it receives. So what we have at the core of our structure is a self-adjusting antenna, and at each phase of its self-adjustment, it's a totally different structure, a totally different shape, and therefore brings a totally different range of frequencies into our structure. But if, let's say, for instance, and not in any way, shape, or form meaning this is literal, because I don't know, most everybody in the so-called healing fields and such would probably say this whole conversation's crazy, but so nobody's mapped it that I know of. I don't know of anywhere else this understanding exists. But let's say the energy that comes in or that is needed by the liver is fed from the parietal bone interacting with the frontal bone, that antenna, that shape. And let's say at 2, the kid was dropped on his forehead, and the frontal bone was all locked up and jammed up into the parietal, and now all his life this kid has had liver problems. And they've tried to surgery his liver, and they've tried to drug his liver, but the frequencies that his liver needs to function aren't coming in through the antenna because the antenna is jammed up.
Gotcha.
Over the years, I've developed a whole set of energy field work. Go ahead.
What happens if you throw in the pineal gland for that discussion? Because I understood the pineal gland part of that frequency transmission transceiver.
Yeah, well, we live in a culture that makes sure that we get a fair share of chlorine and fluoride, which destroys the pineal gland.
Oh.
Halides that attach to the pineal gland and cause it to calcify, so it shuts down. So the only gland that's designed to bring in light and to function from light inside of the body is calcified and shut down. Isn't that interesting? Almost every home in America is flooded every day with chlorine. And most people don't have a clue drinking it, or people who won't drink it say, oh, I'd never drink that stuff, but they shower in it every day, and in a 15-minute hot shower absorb dozens of times the amount they would from drinking the same water all day.
That's right. And in Mexico, the fluoride is in the salt. And bright big letters in the salt. I'd like to switch.
It's really hard to keep up with your conversation. Really hard to understand your words, Merrick.
Jeremy is on the line.
Oh, cool. Hey, Jeremy. Jeremy, if you push 1, that'll put your hand up, and Jeannie will key you in.
Jeremy, you're on.
Hi.
Hey, welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
Delighted. I'm Michael, and Jeannie is the other voice you just heard. Glad you're here.
Yeah, happy to be here. Yeah, I'm having some trauma manifestations in the form of psychogenic seizures and eye strain, and so I'm just recently had reoccurrence of some psychogenic seizures due to trauma, childhood trauma, as well as the passing of my mother, which was very traumatic for me 2 years ago.
Right.
So that's what I'm dealing with at the moment.
How is that impacting your breath? How is your breathing? Do you breathe fairly well?
I think I breathe fairly well. I have to remind myself to deeply breathe. I probably do shallow breath or a medium kind of breath, but I do find myself deeply breathing intentionally due to not breathing well. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's formed a lot of shallow breathing over the last couple of years. Yeah.
Right. Well, that would probably be one of the most important tools to start to use, is to observe the times when your breath is being held. My offering is that the way that we hide things from ourselves, the way that we literally dissociate from energetic patterns that are within us, is that we alter our breathing patterns and shut the breathing down, and that literally becomes the switch that locks that energy into tissue. And then, the seizure is nothing more than that energy building up, and the body says, I need to release this. I need to let go of this. And it builds up to such a momentum that it just energetically takes over, and it's going to create its physiological release. Whereas if you start to work with your breath, I suspect that you'd find you wouldn't be building up those energy spikes, and creating that kind of need to release. So one of the things, are you close to Carrie and Merrick?
Yes, I'm close to Merrick. I'm in his same men's group.
Oh, cool. Okay. So one of the things that I know, Carrie, his wife, has been trained in the still point breathing work that I've developed, and I know she's breathed, Merrick, and you might want to set up and do some still point work with her and see what happens with that. That's a powerful tool for getting past those places. You know, if you watch, the places where people tend to hold the breath is where there's trauma and pain. And if one's in the middle of that trauma and pain moving and they simply allow themselves to take a breath, they'll tend to touch in on a deeper level, be able to experience that trauma or pain directly rather than shutting it down. And when you're allowed to experience it directly and you continue to use the breath, that tends to process the excess energy out that ends up turning to things like trauma and seizures.
Okay.
So you might see if Carrie would be available to do some still point work with you.
Yes, I'm very open to doing that.
And then beyond that, there's a process. We have an app called Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And we're working with the first century Aramaic forgiveness process, and where this culture we live in teaches us that forgiveness is about how I'm in pain only because of you and it's all your fault, but it's okay, I'll forgive you for the energy of pain that's moving in me. And of course, if I let you off of the hook for the energy of pain that's moving in me, I've done nothing to address or change the energy of pain that's inside of me. Where in the first century Aramaic process, there was a technology for how to access literally the hidden parts of our own minds. Part of that technology is the breath, but part of it is how we direct and operate our minds. And so you might want to go to your app store on your phone and type in the word Heartland, all one word, Heartland, Aramaic, ARAMAIC, Aramaic Forgiveness. You'll see a few apps come up, and one of them will have a red glowing heart, and that's our app. And you might want to take that app and start to work with the first century Aramaic forgiveness process. That combined with the breath, I think you'll find will change your life.
Oh, okay, that sounds great. I'll go ahead and download that, get on that app, yeah.
And then any time that you have questions about the use of it, the app is designed so that every page in the app, if you have a question, you can just hit a button, type in your question, send it. G will receive it, will answer the question on the show, and send you back a link to the show. Or you can simply call into the show 5 days a week, an hour a day, 1 till 2 o'clock Eastern Time, and ask your questions, and we're there and happy to guide you through the process.
Oh, okay. That sounds great. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, any other thoughts for you? Or Merrick, you still with us?
Well, I just, I dissolved these figures once before a year and a half ago, because I started having them right after my mother passed, and so I think I do need to do some forgiveness work towards my mother for being in my judgment reckless, which caused her passing. So I will do this for forgiveness work. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, any support we can be, we're here and delighted to do it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Holding the space. Blessings. Merrick, you still out there, sir?
I'm still here.
Any other thoughts?
Well, what I was hoping to hear with Jeremy had to do with his own guilt of feeling that he could do more when his mom passed, and that's been on the surface and deeply disruptive for him. And I was hoping that we could address that.
Is that something you're interested in taking a look at, Jeremy?
Yes.
Cool. So tell me a little bit more about what's happened in that regard. What your thoughts are about it.
Well, my mother, 2 weeks before she passed, she told me that she got this stuff called kratom. This is a supplement, an alternative supplement for pain management. And just right now, I stutter a little bit. And I'm usually a kind of person, because I'm a former massage therapist, that I would check for contraindications and for drug interactions. And I did nothing like that. And I did not check to see if actually kratom was safe for her. So I have a lot of guilt and regret for not doing that, because if I would have looked at it, I would have found that there was unfortunately, some fatal drug interactions with the drugs that she was already on, which, in my assessment, is what caused her passing. Using the kratom stuff, and so I feel guilty about not doing that, and I need to do some forgiveness work on myself, just to forgive myself for not taking those steps to ensure her safety. So,
So let's do a little bit of refinement on this idea of forgiveness. So my suggestion is that you never ever consider forgiving yourself for what happened there. And the reason I suggest that is because you can't forgive yourself for that, because forgiveness, we've been taught a fraud in what this culture teaches us is forgiveness. Basically what the culture says, is something out there is the reason why I am feeling this, and therefore if I let whatever's out there off the hook, i.e. in this case, if I let myself off the hook for the guilt that's in here, then I'm forgiving myself. But actually, that's a Greek idea of pardoning, and it's a really important distinction, because pardoning yourself is a good thing. It can be very useful and helpful, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with forgiveness. What the forgiveness process is in the first century Aramaic language is it's the tool which you will, as you start to use it, apply to your guilt to remove the thought disorders behind your guilt so that you can be freed of guilt. So the application of forgiveness is, if I have guilt in my interaction with you, there's nothing for me to forgive you for, there's nothing for me to forgive myself for. But I want to apply forgiveness to my guilt so that I free my mind from my guilt.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, that totally makes sense, yes.
So in the forgiveness process, and let's see, let me look here. We don't really, I was going to say we could go through the worksheet process, but we don't really have time to do a whole worksheet right now, but I can take you through the key steps, and maybe Carrie or Merrick could help walk you through the rest of it, or we have on our website's whyagain.org, and if you go to the website, in the upper left-hand corner, there's a button that says Start Here. If you click that, it'll take you down to some special radio shows, what we consider, some of our better radio shows, and several of those are shows where we've walked somebody through step by step using the forgiveness worksheet process. So you might want to access that and do some of the core work. But let's just do kind of a mini forgiveness process here. So if I'm understanding correctly, your mom took a drug which created a fatal drug interaction that led to her passing.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a part of you that's feeling responsible for that, and it's given you a chance to project guilt on yourself for what you didn't do to take care of her. Would that be
Yes.
accurate? Okay.
Yes.
Now, this is going to sound strange because it's like way out in left field from anything we've ever been taught about forgiveness. But you'll notice if you just kind of take an overview of your life, unless you're somebody who's just a generally miserable person, you're pretty happy with most everybody in your life as long as they're doing what you want them to do. Would that be an accurate statement for you?
Yeah.
As long as people are fulfilling the goals you have for them, hey, I'm cool. As long as I'm fulfilling the goals I have for myself, then I'm cool with myself.
Yes.
But notice that you had a goal for yourself, and because you didn't fulfill that goal, you're projecting guilt onto yourself. You're putting an emotional load on yourself that weakens and is toxic to you.
Yes.
So it's interesting, in the Aramaic language, the word forgive, translated properly, actually means to cancel. It's got nothing to do with letting somebody off the hook. So in this situation with your mom, it's just doing a miniature worksheet, and as I say, maybe Carrie will walk you through a deeper level of it, just doing a miniature worksheet. What would the goal have been in this situation with your mom? Obviously, it would have been to have done a thorough check on the side effects and the drug interactions with this Credo and prohibited her from using it or suggest she not use it.
Yes.
So having identified the goal in that situation, that shows you the guilt that you hold in your mind. In order, the first step in getting rid of the guilt is going to be to cancel that goal. And the mind naturally says to itself, well, wait a minute, Michael, if I cancel that goal, I mean, that's a perfectly good goal, why would I get rid of that perfectly good goal? Well, let's step back and do a little bit of explanation. There's some interesting Harvard research that we utilize in this work. It actually goes back to the 1950s, and it's some of the most quoted research in history. In the psychological realm. Pardon me. And what they showed, they had people in the laboratory and they're measuring brain cell firings. And in a time frame where they were able to measure 10,000 units of electrical activity firing in the mind, the max amount of data that went into conscious awareness in that same time frame was 9 bits of data. So a little tiny amount of information becomes available on a conscious level compared to what's moving in the subconscious or the unconscious. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So then recognizing that, then obviously if there are 10,000 measurable units of electrical activity happening, something has to determine which 9 bits of data my perception is going to be made out of. Something has to drive that process. And what drives that process is our goals. And so what forgiveness would look like in this situation in terms of you freeing yourself of guilt, and I really don't need to ask you the question, but I will, but how does it look like your life to feel guilty? I mean, is this the first time in your life you've ever felt guilty?
No.
No. It's been a fairly regular occurrence?
Yeah, I'd say mostly a regularly occurrence throughout my whole life. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then the guilt I would offer is not about what happened to your mom. It's not about the fact that you didn't take responsibility and take care of her and check those drug interactions. The reason you're feeling guilt is because there's guilt in your mind. And your mind can use any situation to play it out. If you look back over your life, you've got 1,000 different situations where your mind has said, well, I'm guilty about that, I'm guilty for that, and maybe you had a power person who told you how guilty you were because of this, that, and the next thing. So here's the idea, is that the guilt attaches to those things that we set goals around where we don't achieve what it is we'd like to be achieving. And so what forgiveness would look like in this situation, again, this is just kind of a mini worksheet, what forgiveness would look like would be canceling your goal to have done that research and saved your mom. Now the mind says, wait a minute, why'd I cancel that perfectly good goal? Because notice when you have that goal active in your mind, when you entertain that goal, you feel guilt.
Yes.
And the reason you feel guilt is because it's in your mind, and that goal elicits it. And what it does is it takes that guilt, the thought disorders around guilt, and it uses that very energy to build your brain's image of this whole circumstance with your mother. When you cancel the goal that drives that whole circumstance in which there's guilt, what will happen is that construct of your mind will collapse. And when it collapses, it will tend to collapse in on itself, and you'll come into a more direct relationship with the fact that there is the energy of guilt in your mind that you need to be removing from your mind.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
yes, it does.
Just, we've only got a minute left, so we'll just go through the process very quickly. So how about just, I cancel my need to have done the research on drug interactions and save my mom. Just go ahead and say that out loud and let that go.
Cancel the need to do research on the drug interactions in order to save my mother.
And take a breath, and what happens?
What happens?
What are you feeling?
Grief. I wish I could have saved my mother. I wish she could have still been alive.
Okay.
So the guilt has been released. I feel grief.
Okay. So now take a breath and just allow yourself to be with that grief. And that's going to come from thoughts of loss that need to be cleared out, and those thoughts of loss are going to have to be forgiven. And so what forgiveness is going to look like there, and again, is it going to sound really strange, but recognizing that we are eternal beings, your mother's still alive and well, not in her body at this point, but she still exists. What energy do you suppose, when you think of her, would be best for you to take to her? Guilt and fear, or the presence of love?
Presence of love.
Yeah. So how about the next level, and this is going to sound strange, I cancel my need for Mom to be alive today.
Yeah.
And what happens? Breathing with you.
That is, that's difficult to digest. Yeah.
But do you notice any shift in energy as you do it? I mean, just go ahead and say the words. I cancel my need for Mom to be alive.
I cancel my need for my mother to be alive.
And what's happening?
Grief and trauma.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is with the being
was very traumatic for me, so I'm still
experiencing
the trauma. So
yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of healing trauma.
Yeah. This generally be the way to free yourself of that trauma. You're living out a trauma that most of us have genetically within us, because nobody's known how to resolve the energy of grief around loss and death. And as
especially
you
when
free yourself from the... Go ahead.
especially when one finds their loved one passed. That was very
Yeah, that
traumatic for
would be extremely difficult. I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be difficult.
Yes.
And once again, if you think about yourself and the fact that you were the one who found your mother, even though she wasn't in her body at that point, do you suppose she would have been better off with you experiencing the trauma that you experienced that was in your body? Or would she have been better off if you'd been able to come to her body, find her, and hold a space of sacred love with her and for her?
Actually, I did that. I did both.
Awesome.
I experienced both of that.
Awesome.
I
So
put my
now
hand on
your
her
job...
face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sweet.
Yeah.
Well, I've got tingles all over my body with that one, and joining you in the sweetness and the gift and the presence of mind you had to do that. That is awesome. So I'd support you giving yourself a pat on the back for that one. And
Thank you.
breathing into it. Just breathing with it. And you got a whole community of people from all over the globe right now that are breathing with you at this moment and breathing with your mom at this moment in opening this space for healing and letting go of responsibility and guilt.
Yes, I welcome that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nice. Nice. Thanks for having the consciousness and the awareness to be able to do it, especially since we've done it in 10 minutes or less. That's powerful. Yeah. And holding the space there, I suspect there'll be many more layers of that grief and perhaps self-blame. But this is how you process it. This is how you literally drop into those hidden parts of your own unconscious mind, bringing awareness and love there. Or if you can't do it for yourself, having someone there who holds the space for you like you did for your mom.
Yeah.
And that's where the unconscious healing happens. That's how it's done.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So breathing with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've got it, 2,000%.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, breathing with you fully and holding the space, and we'll look forward to our next conversation.
Yes. Likewise. Thank you very much.
All right, Jeremy. Blessings. Take care. Thanks, everybody, for joining us and connecting with you, breathing with you, and Jeremy holding remembrance and the energy of the love that your mother is in our hearts and in this space at this moment with